When Jungkook fails to show up at Taehyung's highly anticipated public event, fans instantly sense the tension. What happened behind the scenes no one was supposed to know? I don't think he's coming. The whisper sliced through the buzz of the crowd like a quiet alarm, barely audible over the sea of screams and camera clicks. All eyes were on Taehyung, standing under the glittering stage lights. His smile firm but just shy of genuine. His hand, which had been raised mid-wave, slowly lowered to his side. The empty seat next to the other BTS members was painfully obvious to those who knew what to look for, and the ARMY always knew. It was supposed to be a night of celebration. Taehyung's art gallery event, held in a sleek, modern hall in the heart of Seoul, had been promoted for weeks. Fans and media had flown in from all over the world. The event wasn't just about paintings, it was about vulnerability, about Taehyung's private world made public through brushstrokes and sketches. And everyone had expected Jungkook to be there. They always showed up for each other, especially for things that mattered. But Jungkook never arrived. Inside the venue, Taehyung stood before a massive canvas titled "Winter Left Too Soon," and though he spoke with practiced ease, there was a certain stillness to his eyes, a weight behind the usual charm. He mentioned gratitude, inspiration, memory, but he never mentioned Jungkook, not once. And that silence screamed louder than any tabloid headline. Backstage, Seokjin and Jimin exchanged subtle glances. Hoseok's jaw clenched when he scrolled through his phone, seeing a barrage of real-time tweets about Jungkook's absence. Even Namjoon, always calm and diplomatic, looked unsettled when reporters started asking softly pointed questions. Was Jungkook busy? Is everything okay between the members? The truth was more complicated than anyone dared to say aloud. Just 48 hours before the event, Jungkook and Taehyung had a confrontation that none of the other members had witnessed in full, but they'd heard it. The shouting, the slammed door, the silence afterward. No one was quite sure what triggered it, only that Jungkook had stormed out of their shared rehearsal space, his expression unreadable, his voice hoarse from something more than just yelling. And Taehyung hadn't chased after him. For fans, the signs were subtle but undeniable. Jungkook's Instagram remained untouched on the day of the event. No stories, no support post, not even a repost of the gallery flyer. For a fandom trained in observation, his silence was a thunderclap. Within hours, number "Where is Jungkook" trended worldwide, alongside number Taehyung event and number BTS without JK. Fan theories spiraled. Some thought it was scheduling, others suspected a deeper fallout. But no one could deny the energy was off. Later that night, Jungkook was seen exiting a quiet studio on the city's outskirts, his hoodie pulled low and his face tense. A fan caught the moment on camera. No smile, no wave, just a fleeting shadow disappearing into a black van. The image went viral. It wasn't just the absence, it was the contrast. Taehyung in full light, smiling through glass smiles. Jungkook in the dark, moving like a ghost. Taehyung's voice was calm during his interview later that evening, but his words were clipped. "Tonight is about the art," he said when asked about Jungkook. "I want people to focus on what's here, not what's missing." But even as he said it, his gaze flickered toward the entrance, just once, waiting perhaps, hoping. Back at their dorm, the members avoided pressing either of them. BTS had always been close, but they'd also learned to give space. Still, the air was heavy, especially when Jimin walked into the kitchen and found Jungkook sitting at the table, staring at his phone, not moving. Jimin didn't speak. He just poured water, handed him a glass, and sat down. "I watched the stream," Jungkook said after a long pause. He looked happy. Jimin didn't reply immediately. Then, carefully, he said, "He was trying." There was a crack in Jungkook's expression, something between guilt and stubbornness. His fingers curled tighter around his phone. "He shouldn't have used that painting. The one we talked about." His voice was quiet, but laced with something bitter. "He knew that meant something different to me. Maybe that's why he included it." Jimin replied softly, "To say something without saying it." Jungkook's jaw clenched. "He could have just talked to me, and you could have gone tonight," Jimin countered, not unkindly. The silence that followed was longer, more painful. What no one outside their circle knew was that the argument hadn't been about schedules or misunderstandings. It had been about trust, about a promise that had been quietly broken, about a moment in New York last year, and a song that was never released. About Taehyung reaching out to someone Jungkook didn't expect, and Jungkook pulling away in response. It wasn't betrayal, but it felt close. And so, when the night of the gallery came, Jungkook couldn't bring himself to go. Not because he didn't care, but because caring too much had started to hurt. The fallout continued to ripple through the fandom. Edits appeared online, splitting the event screen into two. Taehyung's poised smile on one side, Jungkook's shadowed exit on the other. Armies debated, some siding with one, others simply hoping they'd talk things out. The dynamic that once felt unbreakable now felt tense, real, human. Days later, Taehyung posted a photo, no caption, just a shot of the empty chair next to him at the gallery event cropped close, poetic in its stillness. Fans didn't need words. They knew who the seat was meant for, and that night, Jungkook reposted it. No caption either, just the broken heart emoji. Small, silent, but loud enough to make the world feel it. The studio was cold, not from the temperature, but from the way it echoed with absence. Jungkook stood in the center, surrounded by muted speakers and unfinished lyrics. The soft hum of equipment left on providing the only sense of life in the sterile room. He didn't move for a long time. His fingers hovered above a keyboard, his eyes fixed on the blinking cursor of an open file titled simply, V. He hadn't touched it in weeks. Outside, the city pulsed with midnight energy. Seoul never really slept, but in that room, time felt arrested, like he had stepped outside of it, trapped between regret and pride. His phone sat face down on the desk beside him. It hadn't buzzed. Not from Taehyung, not from any of the members. Only Jimin, hours ago, and Jungkook had left it unanswered. Not because he didn't want to reply, but because he didn't know how. The photo repost had been a moment of weakness, or maybe defiance. Maybe both. He wasn't sure anymore. He hadn't meant to make a statement. He didn't want to escalate anything, but the image of that empty chair broadcast to millions had haunted him. It hadn't been just a chair, it had been his time's chair. His place next to Taehyung, next to all of them, and he hadn't taken it. The door creaked behind him. He tensed. No one was supposed to know he was here. I knew you'd be here. Jimin's voice broke the silence. Not soft, not harsh, just real. Jungkook didn't turn around immediately. He stared forward, then slowly closed the laptop. You tracked me again? Jimin stepped in, holding two hot drinks. It's not tracking, it's intuition. And a little help from Namjoon. Jungkook gave a dry chuckle. Of course. Jimin set the drinks down and leaned against the table, watching him. I don't want to talk about what happened if you're not ready, but you need to stop running from it. Jungkook's jaw clenched. I'm not running. You didn't show up. I times couldn't asterisk. The words came out sharper than he intended. He exhaled hard, turning away. You think I didn't want to be there? You think I didn't? God, Jimin. I watched the entire thing from here. Every minute, every photo, every damn sentence he said. And that chair. He swallowed hard. It wasn't just a chair. Jimin didn't interrupt. He let Jungkook pace, unravel, try to hold the pieces of himself together while pretending they weren't already slipping through his fingers. I told him, Jungkook finally said, voice lower now, trembling at the edges. I told him that song meant something different. That memory, New York, the rooftop. That night we said it was just ours. Not for press, not for a gallery wall. It was the one moment where I didn't feel like Jungkook of BTS. I was just me, with him. And he turned it into something public. Something times open asterisk. Jimin sat down, letting the silence breathe between them. Then, carefully, he said, maybe it wasn't betrayal. Maybe it was his way of reaching you, of telling the world what you meant to him. But that's not how it felt. I know. Jungkook's hands trembled. He ran a hand through his hair, exhausted. I didn't want to be angry. I didn't want this to become what it became. But it's like we're talking different languages now. Everything I say, he twists. Everything he says, I overthink. Jimin gave a small nod. You both are hurting, and neither of you wants to admit it first. Jungkook sank into the chair, eyes heavy, soul heavier. We used to be better than this. Then go fix it, Jimin said. No softness now, just conviction. Before it gets worse. The next day, fans noticed something strange. A photo posted on Weverse by Taehyung was suddenly deleted, then re-uploaded with a new caption. Some silences speak louder than songs. Armies exploded with speculation. Was it about Jungkook? Was this a message? The post garnered 1 million likes in less than 30 minutes. But behind closed doors, the real conversation was just beginning. Jungkook showed up at Taehyung's apartment that evening unannounced. The air between them was thick with everything unsaid. The moment the door opened, they stood there in silence, staring, breathing, scanning for signs of weakness in each other's expressions. Taehyung stepped aside, wordlessly inviting him in. The lights were dim. A record played softly in the background. An instrumental, familiar, unspoken. Jungkook sat on the edge of the couch. Taehyung remained standing for a long moment before sitting opposite him. Legs crossed, gaze guarded. I saw the post. Jungkook began, voice low. I figured, was it for me? Taehyung didn't answer immediately. He leaned forward, elbows on knees. Did you think I put that painting up to hurt you? Jungkook's throat tightened. I thought I didn't matter enough to keep it between us. Taehyung's eyes flashed with something between hurt and anger. So that's what you think of me now? I don't know what to think, Jungkook admitted. You didn't ask. You just used it. Like it was a piece of art, not a memory. Taehyung stood, pacing now. It was a memory. A beautiful one. One that changed me. I wasn't trying to exploit it, I was trying to hold on to it. You don't talk to me anymore. You shut down. You walk out. That painting, it was the only way I could feel close to you. Jungkook stood too, heat rising in his chest. Then maybe you should have just said that. I did asterisk, Jungkook. 1,000 times in 1,000 ways you refused to hear. Their voices rose, echoing off the walls. The storm finally breaking. I waited for you that night, Taehyung continued, quieter now. I kept looking at the door. Every person that walked in, I thought, maybe you'd come in late. Maybe you'd surprise me. I was going to. Jungkook whispered. I had the suit on. I had the gift in my hand. But when I got to the elevator, I couldn't press the button. My hands were shaking. I felt like if I walked in there, I wouldn't recognize us anymore. Silence fell like snow cold. Still, burying everything in its path. Taehyung stepped closer, voice fragile. Do you still know who we are? Jungkook didn't speak. He looked at him, really looked. The pain under his eyes. The worry in the way his hands fidgeted. The stubborn fire still flickering behind his defiance. He remembered nights on rooftops, laughter in hotel rooms, the way they danced when no one was watching. He remembered what it used to be, what it could still become if they were brave enough. I don't want to lose you, Jungkook said finally. Then stop acting like you already have, Taehyung replied. They stood inches apart now, close enough to feel the shift in breath. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was the beginning of understanding. Later that night, a private photo surfaced online, grainy, taken from afar. Jungkook and Taehyung leaving a quiet side entrance of the studio building. Not smiling, not posing, just walking side by side in silence. Fans didn't need confirmation. They just needed that moment. The caption on the fan post read simply, maybe they're finding their way back. And maybe they were. Under the cover of darkness, the streets of Seoul whispered with early spring rain, fine mist curling over sidewalks, and neon reflecting off wet pavement like spilled paint. Jungkook and Taehyung walked without speaking, their steps instinctively in sync, neither of them quite knowing where they were headed. Only that the silence between them no longer felt like a wall. It felt more like a breath. Fragile, tentative, but alive. They reached the Han River without meaning to. The same place they had come to years ago, during another moment of tension that had almost broken them. The sky overhead was low, heavy with clouds, but the city lights shimmered off the water like stars that had fallen and refused to drown. Taehyung shoved his hands into his coat pockets and stared out over the rippling surface. I thought about deleting the painting, he said after a long stretch of quiet. The night before the event, I was sitting there in the gallery and I almost took it down. Jungkook turned to him slowly, the wind pressing soft against their faces. Why didn't you? Because it felt dishonest. Like I'd be erasing something important just to protect what's broken. And I don't want us to pretend. I wanted to remember us, before we forgot how to talk. Jungkook looked down, his voice almost a whisper. I never forgot. I just didn't know how to reach you anymore without hurting you. Taehyung's laugh was hollow, tired. So you disappeared instead. I didn't mean to, Jungkook admitted. It's like I got lost in my own anger, and I let it grow. I let it tell me stories that weren't true, and then it was easier to believe them than to confront what was real. Taehyung exhaled hard through his nose. We used to be better than this. Jungkook gave a weak smile. Jimin said the same thing. The wind tugged at their hair, soft strands fluttering over eyes as they stood shoulder to shoulder in the dark. No crowds, no fans, no stage lights. Just two boys who had become men under the weight of fame and expectation, trying to remember what it felt like to just be them. I miss the way we used to laugh, Taehyung murmured. Back when everything wasn't so complicated. Jungkook's voice was raw. Back when we still trusted each other enough to share everything. Taehyung turned to him slowly, his eyes searching. Do you think we can go back? Jungkook met his gaze without flinching. No, but maybe we can build something new. Something real. Not just for the fans. Not for show. For times us asterisk. Taehyung nodded slowly, something soft flickering behind his eyes. Then let's start now. They didn't need to say more. Words had failed them too many times lately. So instead, they walked. Quietly. Together. In the days that followed, the atmosphere among the members began to shift. Jungkook started showing up to group rehearsals again. Still guarded, but present. Taehyung no longer looked away when their eyes met across a room. Jimin noticed it first, the way Jungkook lingered a little longer after meetings. Or how Taehyung offered him water without being asked. Subtle things. Unspoken peace offerings. The fandom, however, was still in turmoil. Every post was dissected, every interaction analyzed. A grainy video of Jungkook reaching to fix Taehyung's mic during a recording session sent Twitter into meltdown. The fans wanted answers. They wanted a moment. A photo. A statement. Something to tell them everything was okay again. But nothing came. Until it did. Taehyung posted first. A single sentence on Weverse. Sometimes the best art comes from the hardest truths. Then Jungkook followed an hour later, surprising everyone with a candid, unfiltered photo. The two of them in a dimly lit studio, facing away from the camera, scribbling lyrics on opposite sides of the same page. The caption read, Trust rebuilt. Slowly. Honestly. The post shattered engagement records in minutes. Armies around the world cried, cheered, speculated, but inside the studio, the mood was calm, focused, healing. They were writing again. The song was slow, painful, but beautiful. It wasn't meant for an album. It wasn't for charts. It was for them. About nights spent in silence. About miscommunication. About the fear of losing someone you thought was permanent. It didn't have a hook. It didn't need one. It was just the truth. Namjoon listened in silence as they played it back, hands folded beneath his chin. When it ended, he didn't say anything for a moment. It's raw, he said finally. But it's time's real asterisk, and that makes it powerful. Taehyung looked at Jungkook, something unspoken passing between them. Jungkook gave a small nod. Let's release it, he said. Namjoon raised an eyebrow. As what? A hidden track? Jungkook shook his head. As a message. Just us. No promotions. No teaser. Just drop it. Let the song speak. Taehyung smiled for the first time in weeks. Let the silence end with music. When the song dropped without warning 2 nights later, it was like the world stopped. No announcement. No fanfare. Just a link posted on both of their profiles with one line. For those who've waited, we're still here. The fandom flooded with tears. The lyrics were bare. The production was stripped down. And the vocals fragile. Trembling in places carried the kind of emotion that couldn't be faked. It wasn't just a song. It was a confession. Within hours, it climbed global charts. But that didn't matter to either of them. That night, Jungkook and Taehyung sat on the dorm balcony, feet propped on the railing, sharing a blanket and a beer. You know, Taehyung said, gaze on the stars. For the first time in months, I don't feel like I'm performing. Jungkook smiled. Yeah, me too. They clinked bottles and drank in silence, the city breathing around them. Whatever storm had passed between them, it hadn't broken them, it had stripped them down to something more honest, more human. And now, there was room to rebuild. Not as idols, not even as bandmates, but as two people who had hurt each other and still chose to stay. Because some bonds didn't break, they bent, and then they healed. The dorm was unusually quiet the morning after the song dropped, as if even the walls were absorbing the weight of what had been released into the world. There were no loud greetings or teasing laughter echoing from the kitchen, no buzzing phone alarms clashing with the coffee machine. Just stillness, a soft hush that felt sacred, reflective, like the pause after a confession has been made, and both hearts are still trembling. Jungkook stood in front of the large window in the common room, his cup of tea barely touched. He wasn't watching the city. He was listening to his own breathing, to the beat of his pulse, to the silence that no longer felt suffocating. Behind him, the sun stretched through the curtains, brushing over his shoulder like a quiet reminder that the world hadn't ended, even though it felt like something monumental had shifted. When Taehyung entered the room, barefoot and hair tousled from sleep, he didn't say anything at first. He walked past Jungkook, opened the fridge, pulled out orange juice, and leaned against the counter, sipping from the carton like he always did. It was such a normal action, so domestic, that Jungkook let out a small, involuntary laugh. Taehyung turned his head. What? Jungkook shook his head with a smile. You never use a glass. Taehyung smirked, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. You sound like Jin Young. They shared a look then, the kind that didn't need words. A thread between them, newly repaired but still fragile. But it held. The group chat was flooded by then. Yoongi had sent a simple fire emoji, Hoseok a row of crying faces, and Jin had left a voice message saying, I don't know if I want to hug you both or yell at you for making me sob into my ramen last night. Even the company had called Namjoon, asking why the track hadn't gone through proper channels. We didn't do it for numbers, Taehyung told him when they met later that day in the studio lounge, sitting on the floor cross-legged like trainees again. We did it because we had to say it before we forgot how. Namjoon nodded. Then you said it the right way. But not everything outside was as kind. While a majority of fans celebrated the emotional reunion and vulnerability, others speculated endlessly. Think pieces began circulating, questions laced between praise. Was this planned? Was this a marketing tactic? Were they hiding a deeper rift? The noise began to rise again, threatening to drown the peace they had so carefully begun to rebuild. Jungkook read the comments late at night, lying in bed with one arm behind his head and his phone casting a pale glow on his face. His eyes didn't flinch when he scrolled past lines that doubted his sincerity, his loyalty, his heart. But something in him tightened all the same. Taehyung entered his room around midnight without knocking. He didn't need to anymore. I knew you'd still be up, he said, sitting at the foot of the bed and pulling his hoodie sleeves over his hands. You always read too much. Jungkook lowered the phone. They're just trying to understand. Some of them don't want to understand. They want a story. Well, we gave them one. Taehyung looked at him. Did we? Jungkook sighed, pushing the phone away. I don't know. Maybe we gave them a door, and now they're just trying to figure out what's behind it. Taehyung tilted his head. You think we should have kept it locked? Jungkook met his gaze for a long moment. No. I think we just need to be ready for whatever walks through. The next day, the two of them met with their label for what was supposed to be a routine planning session. Instead, it became a quiet negotiation, how to move forward, how to balance personal truths with public perception. The staff was kind, supportive even, but it was clear there was a desire to refocus, to steer the narrative back to safer ground. We're not trying to erase anything, one executive said carefully. But we do need to remember what's expected. The fans look to you as a unit. Taehyung leaned forward, his voice even. And they also look to us as human beings. That song was the most honest thing we've made in a year. Jungkook didn't speak much during that meeting, only observed. But later, in the hallway outside, he turned to Taehyung and asked, what if they try to control this again? Taehyung's eyes narrowed. Then we write louder. It became their private motto. They started spending more time together again, not always in public, not for photos, but in the quiet corners of studios and dorm rooms and car rides. Sometimes they talked about lyrics, Sometimes they didn't talk at all. Sometimes it was just Taehyung playing guitar while Jungkook scribbled notes or hummed under his breath. Sometimes it was a shared meal in silence. No pressure, no performance, just presence. The others noticed the change. During one group rehearsal, when Jungkook accidentally bumped into Taehyung during choreography and instinctively reached to steady him, no one said anything but Hoseok smiled. During a late shoot, when Jungkook tossed his jacket over Taehyung's shoulders without looking, Yoongi raised an eyebrow but said nothing. The balance was returning, slow but steady. Until the interview. It was meant to be a simple segment promoting their next group release, celebrating their journey, answering some light questions from the host. But the moment the interviewer leaned forward and asked, "Was there ever a moment recently where you thought about stepping away from each other?" the room shifted. The other members froze. Jungkook's jaw tightened. Taehyung looked down. Namjoon started to speak, but Jungkook raised a hand slightly, almost imperceptibly.
Then he answered, "Yes." The air was sucked from the room. "I thought about it," Jungkook continued, his voice steady. "Not because I stopped caring, but because I thought maybe caring too much was causing more damage than good." The host blinked, caught off guard. The silence was heavy. Taehyung looked up then, meeting Jungkook's eyes. "And I thought if I let him go, maybe he'd come back when he was ready. If not, at least he'd be free." Jungkook smiled faintly, "But I did come back." The host, visibly emotional, cleared her throat. "You too. You've always had a bond that fans admire deeply. It's good to see you healing." Taehyung nodded. "We're still learning how." The clip went viral within minutes. But this time, the reception was different. This time, the fans didn't clamor for drama. They didn't demand explanations. Instead, they flooded comment sections with encouragement, support, gratitude. The hashtag #WeSeeYou began trending. Edits were made not of their fights but of their laughter, their duets, their quieter moments, backstage glances, hand brushes, shared microphones. The fans weren't hungry for scandal anymore. They wanted sincerity. And they gave it. A surprise behind-the-scenes vlog dropped the following week, unpolished, full of raw footage. Taehyung sitting on the floor laughing as Jungkook tried to open a stubborn snack bag. Jungkook resting his head on Taehyung's shoulder during a car ride, eyes closed, peaceful. Taehyung humming a melody in the studio, Jungkook layering vocals over it, both of them smiling. No narration, no edits. Just them. The final scene was shot at night. Just like everything else had started, Jungkook and Taehyung on the dorm balcony, leaning on the rail side by side. Jungkook looked at the camera and simply said, "Sometimes you don't need to fix everything, you just need to show up and stay." Taehyung added, "And forgive, again and again, until the silence turns into music." Then the screen faded to black. No fanfare. No credits. Just two names. Kim Taehyung, Jian Jungkook, and a single word. Still, the airport wasn't crowded when they arrived, but even in the stillness of the early morning there was an eerie hum in the air, a whisper that something significant was happening beneath the ordinary. Jungkook wore a cap low over his brow, mask up, hands buried in his jacket pockets. Taehyung, just a few steps behind, looked almost identical in appearance, but their energy was what separated them. Taehyung walked like a man reclaiming calm. Jungkook walked like someone balancing on the edge of something fragile. They didn't speak much on the drive there, just shared glances through the rearview mirror. The car was quiet, the silence heavy, but not hostile. It was the kind of silence that had depth, rooted in understanding that words at this point could only ruin what progress had been made. Inside the private lounge, the others were already waiting. Hoseok waved them over, a sleepy smile tugging at his lips. Jimin raised his coffee in greeting, while Seokjin muttered something about being too old for 5 a.m. call times. Yoongi nodded from beneath the brim of his bucket hat, and Namjoon looked up from his notes, giving them both a slight but knowing smile. Taehyung slid into the seat beside Jimin. Jungkook stayed standing for a moment, scanning the room, his eyes lingering briefly on the empty seat next to Taehyung. Then, without a word, he took it. The moment passed like a breath, small, almost invisible, but Jimin caught it, and his hand moved subtly beneath the table, squeezing Taehyung's knee in quiet approval. They were flying to Tokyo for an award show, something pre-planned, mandatory, elegant. Something they used to look forward to. But this time, the stakes felt higher. This was their first public reappearance as a united front since the release of the song, since the silence had broken, since the fans had turned their mourning into mourning doves, small symbols of hope fluttering across timelines and comment sections. The plane ride was uneventful, quiet. Jungkook slept most of the time, hood up, legs curled toward the window. Taehyung didn't sleep. He stared out at the clouds, headphones in, replaying the melody in his mind, their melody. The one that still didn't have a title but didn't need one either. The one they had written not to impress but to heal. It wasn't until they landed and stepped out into the blinding flash of cameras that the tension cracked. One shutter click after another, journalists shouting their names. Microphones shoved forward. A question rang out, too loud to ignore. Jungkook, Taehyung, does the song mean BTS is splitting? The air turned electric. Security moved to push the crowd back. Staff whispered in ears, trying to divert the chaos. But the question hung there like a blade, and the two men at its center had only seconds to choose how to respond. Taehyung glanced at Jungkook. Jungkook met his eyes. Then Jungkook stepped forward, pulled his mask down, and for the first time in months he didn't hesitate. "It means we're learning how to be real," he said. His voice didn't waver. "That's all." Then he walked. Taehyung followed, and for the first time in what felt like a year, they walked side by side, not as two fractured souls tiptoeing around one another, but as two men who had broken apart and still found a way to return. The award show was a spectacle. Lights, fire, synchronized routines. But it was their performance near the end that left the crowd breathless. Not because of the choreography, not because of the fireworks, but because of one moment, mid-song in the quiet bridge, when the lights dimmed and Taehyung stepped forward, looking directly into the camera and reached behind him. And Jungkook took his hand. Not as a fan service, not rehearsed. It wasn't scripted. It was real. The audience didn't scream, they gasped, a collective inhale like a heartbeat skipping a beat. And Taehyung smiled, not wide, not exaggerated. Just a small lift at the corner of his mouth, the kind of smile you only give someone who's seen every version of you and stayed. When the performance ended, the applause felt endless. It wasn't for the perfection, it was for the truth. Backstage, they stood alone for a moment before the others rejoined them. Jungkook leaned against the wall, his shirt damp with sweat, hair stuck to his forehead. Taehyung turned toward him, his fingers twitching at his side. "You didn't have to take my hand," he said softly. "I know," Jungkook replied, "but I wanted to." Taehyung's eyes softened, and he stepped closer, close enough to smell the sweat and cologne, close enough to hear Jungkook's breath hitch. "You scared me," he admitted. "I scared myself," Jungkook said, "but I'm not running anymore." Taehyung reached up slowly and pushed a damp lock of hair from Jungkook's brow. His touch was gentle, familiar. "Then let's stop pretending we're okay when we're not. If we fight, we fight. If we cry, we cry. But let's not go silent again. Ever." Jungkook nodded, voice tight. "Promise." Outside the dressing room, the rest of the members waited. Jimin leaned on Hoseok's shoulder, already smiling. Namjoon tapped a message to their manager. Yoongi stood arms crossed, eyes squinting at the monitor. "About time," he muttered, watching the replay of the bridge moment. They flew back to Seoul 2 days later. The dorm was quiet again, but this time peaceful. The kind of quiet that follows a storm, where everything still smells like rain but the sun is already warming the windows. Jungkook spent the evening organizing the files on his laptop, archiving old demos, opening blank ones. Taehyung sat on the floor beside him with his sketchbook, drawing faceless figures under a night sky. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Somewhere near midnight, Jungkook stood, stretched, and walked toward the balcony. Taehyung followed without question. They leaned on the railing together, as they had done so many times before, but this time there was nothing weighing them down. No tension, no fear, just the cool breeze and the distant hum of the city that had raised them. "You know," Jungkook said, "we never named the song." Taehyung's head tilted slightly. "Maybe we don't have to." Jungkook looked out over the lights, then back at him. "Still." Taehyung raised an eyebrow. "Still what?" "Just still, as in we're still here, still trying, still choosing each other." Taehyung nodded slowly. "Still," he echoed. They stayed out there until the sky began to pale. And when dawn finally came, it didn't feel like an end. It felt like a beginning. By the time spring stretched its fingers fully into the city, painting the trees with pale pink and gold, a subtle change had woven its way into the fabric of their lives. It wasn't sudden, wasn't explosive. It was slow, like warmth returning to a room that had been cold for too long. A gradual reawakening. Trust, once fractured and tentative, had begun to settle again beneath the surface of everything they touched, still bruised in places, still healing, but no longer on the verge of breaking. The studio had become their sanctuary again. Some nights it echoed with music, beats layered under soft vocal takes, laughter spilling through cracked doors, the rustle of lyric pages being tossed aside and rewritten. Other nights it was quiet, the only sound being the gentle tapping of Taehyung's pencil against the rim of his glass or the subtle creak of Jungkook's chair as he leaned back, eyes closed, letting the melody find him. They never forced it. If a session turned into silence, they let it. If it turned into confession, they didn't run from it. That was the rule now, honesty above everything. Taehyung noticed it first, the way Jungkook lingered in rooms longer, not as someone waiting for direction, but as someone unafraid to just be there. The way he asked questions again, the way his voice no longer dropped when Taehyung entered the room, the way he sang with his whole chest again, like something inside him had been unclenched. Jungkook, on the other hand, noticed smaller things, the way Taehyung no longer hid behind jokes when something hurt, the way his sketches had returned to their original style, raw, scratchy, vulnerable, the way his eyes found Jungkook more often now, not searching for blame but anchoring them both in place, a steady presence. And when they finally sat down with the rest of the members to talk about the group's next era, it wasn't tense, it wasn't awkward, it was real. They talked through concepts, through fears, through fatigue, through the weight of being legends and the risk of being misunderstood. They didn't try to be perfect, they just tried to be honest, and in that honesty, something clicked again. The team noticed too. Stylists who had once tiptoed around them now smiled freely again. Camera crews no longer had to reshoot because someone flinched. The tension in every behind-the-scenes clip had dissolved into something warmer, more whole. Fans saw it in subtle moments, Jungkook handing Taehyung a mic without looking, Taehyung catching Jungkook's wrist in rehearsals and holding it a second longer, shared smiles in choreography run-throughs, not loud, not dramatic, just there. One night, after a particularly long vocal session, the two of them ended up on the dorm rooftop again. The city spread out below them in a mosaic of moving lights. They sat shoulder to shoulder, drinks in hand, sharing warmth between them as if it had never left. Jungkook looked out, his voice barely more than breath. "You know what scared me the most back then?" Taehyung turned, not answering, just listening. "That I wasn't enough," Jungkook said. "That after everything, you'd outgrow me. That the person you were becoming didn't need the person I still was." Taehyung was quiet for a long moment, then leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I was scared too. That if I pulled you closer, you'd disappear. That if I didn't, you'd leave anyway." They sat in that vulnerability, letting it wrap around them like a blanket. And for the first time, neither tried to fix the silence. They just let it breathe. Eventually, Taehyung turned his head and asked, "Do you still write about it? About us?" Jungkook nodded, "Every night." "Do you want to share one?" Jungkook didn't hesitate. He pulled out his phone, scrolled for a moment, and handed it over. Taehyung read the line slowly, mouth parting just slightly as the words settled in his chest. "I wasn't made to be loud like you. But I loved the way you filled every silence I built. I thought the distance would protect us. But I didn't know it would burn louder than your name." He looked up, eyes glassy. "You wrote this after the gallery night, didn't you?" Jungkook nodded. "It just poured out. I hated how much I still needed you." Taehyung stared at him, long and full, like he was looking at him for the first time again. "You never needed to hate it. You were allowed." Jungkook exhaled, shaky and deep. "And you?" "I'm still writing too," Taehyung admitted. "But mine's not poetry, it's melody. I can't explain it in words. I hear it, I live in it." "Can I hear it?" Taehyung looked at him, then nodded. The next night they went back into the studio, not as idols, not as Jungkook and Taehyung of BTS, just as themselves. No staff. No deadlines. No pressure. Taehyung sat at the keyboard, fingers grazing the keys with delicate certainty. He began to play soft, slow, a haunting progression that wrapped around the room like fog. Jungkook closed his eyes, letting the melody soak into him, and then he began to sing. No lyrics. Just voice. It was instinctual, emotional, a conversation in sound. Their pain, their apology, their hope, all translated through harmonies and breath. They recorded it in one take. And when it ended, neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The file was saved without a name, just a date. Later, as they stepped outside, the air felt lighter. It wasn't the end of their story. It wasn't even the beginning. It was simply the truth. And for the first time in a long, long time, truth was enough. Taehyung slipped his hand into Jungkook as they walked back under the city lights. No one saw, no cameras clicked, no fans screamed. But if someone had been there, they would have seen it clearly. Not fan service. Not obligation. Just two people who had survived the storm. Still, together, there was something about the rhythm of their footsteps that night that felt different, less cautious, more certain. The quiet between them didn't press anymore. It held. It supported. A stillness born not of distance but of knowing. Not every silence needed to be filled because not every silence meant something was wrong. And in that understanding, something deeper had taken root. They passed through familiar alleyways, places they'd walked years ago when dreams still wore rough edges, when they'd snuck out for street food at 2 a.m., hiding behind hoodies and youth. Now older, changed, shaped by pressure and spotlight, they walked the same path not as shadows of who they'd been, but as survivors of who they'd become. Taehyung stopped at a vending machine without saying a word. Jungkook leaned against the wall nearby, head tilted back, eyes tracing the lines of clouds above the buildings. The sky was overcast but warm, the kind of night that made the world feel heavy and soft at the same time. Taehyung handed him a can, peach tea. "You remembered," Jungkook said with a quiet smile, fingers brushing Taehyung's as he took it. "You always drink this when you can't sleep." Jungkook popped the tab and took a slow sip. "I haven't been sleeping much." "I figured." They stood in the glow of the machine for a while, the orange light casting gentle shadows on their faces. Cars passed in the distance, muffled. Somewhere, a dog barked. A neon sign buzzed intermittently above them, half-lit, blinking like it couldn't decide whether to give up or keep trying. "You know," Taehyung began, voice thoughtful, "I used to worry that we'd never be able to come back from it. That one day we'd cross a line and never find our way back." Jungkook's eyes didn't leave the sky. "Maybe we did cross it." Taehyung looked at him, searching his expression. But maybe, Jungkook added softly, we built a bridge. The words hung there between them, gentle but rooted. Taehyung reached into his pocket, pulled out a folded scrap of paper and handed it over. Jungkook opened it slowly. Inside was a sketch, rough lines, charcoal smudged at the edges. Two figures standing at opposite ends of a broken bridge, both holding ropes, trying to rebuild from their side. In the middle, suspended above the abyss, was a single stone with the word "still" carved into it. I drew it that night after the awards show, Taehyung said. Didn't know if I'd show it to you. Jungkook folded the paper carefully and tucked it into his jacket. Thank you for not burning it. They kept walking after that, neither quite knowing where they were headed. The city wasn't asleep, but it wasn't fully awake either, and somehow that in-between hour suited them. When they reached the practice room, the lights were off, but the door wasn't locked. Jungkook flicked on a lamp in the corner, casting the room in a soft yellow haze. The mirrors reflected them dimly, like ghosts of their past selves watching from another time. Taehyung walked to the center of the room and lay down on the floor. Jungkook joined him a second later, their shoulders brushing. I used to hate this floor, Jungkook said after a long pause. All the pressure, the corrections, the stares. I used to love it, Taehyung murmured. It was the only place I felt like I wasn't pretending. Jungkook turned his head. What about now? Taehyung closed his eyes. Now it feels like home again. There was a long silence after that, not heavy, just full of everything that didn't need to be said out loud anymore. Eventually, Taehyung reached over and laced their fingers together. It was a quiet gesture, simple and steady, but in that moment it felt like a promise more powerful than any lyric. Jungkook squeezed gently in response. They fell asleep like that, lying on the old wooden floor, surrounded by the faint scent of sweat, the ghost of past routines, and the weightless peace of reconciliation. In the days that followed, they didn't announce anything. They didn't post curated photos or record-staged videos. They just lived. Together, slowly. The industry buzzed with curiosity, of course, speculation, rumors, but for once they didn't feel the need to address it. The fans would see it in the music, in the way they moved, in the way their voices bent toward one another again on stage like magnets finding their original pull. Their next performance was an acoustic stage, just the two of them. No choreography, no lights, just two stools, two microphones, and the raw, unguarded harmony of two voices that had once sung in battle, now singing in peace. They sang still, unannounced, unexpected. The crowd didn't scream, they listened, breath held, hearts wide open. And when it ended, Taehyung leaned toward the mic, voice barely a whisper. We were never broken, he said, just learning. Jungkook looked over at him, eyes soft, and still choosing each other. The arena erupted, not with noise but with tears, with knowing, with the kind of collective exhale that only comes when 1,000 hearts recognize their own reflection in someone else's truth. Later that night, in the privacy of the dorm kitchen, Jungkook poured them both glasses of water. Taehyung sat at the table, arms crossed, eyes bright. You didn't tell me you were going to say that, Taehyung teased, referring to the mic comment. Jungkook grinned, you didn't either. Taehyung laughed, head tilted back, and Jungkook watched him, really watched him, like the sound was a song he hadn't heard in months. I like us like this, Jungkook said quietly. So do I, Taehyung replied, but promise me something. Anything. If we ever get lost again, don't walk away. Jungkook stepped closer, reached out and touched the side of Taehyung's face, fingers trailing gently down his jaw. I won't walk away. Not again, not ever. Taehyung leaned into the touch, eyes fluttering closed. Good, because I'd chase you this time. They stood there like that, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound, their closeness no longer needing explanation. There was no grand ending, no fireworks, just the slow, patient unfolding of something real, something earned. They weren't perfect, but they were present. And sometimes that was all love needed to survive, not perfection. Just presence. Just effort. Just still. The studio clock blinked past 3:17 a.m., the kind of time when thoughts become louder than music, when the world forgets how to spin with urgency, and silence becomes a canvas. The others had long since gone to bed. The halls were dim, echoing only with the occasional creak of floorboards, but in room B, behind a half-closed door dimly lit with a single desk lamp, Jungkook sat on the floor with his knees drawn to his chest, headphones over his ears, Taehyung's scarf loosely draped around his shoulders. The demo track played on loop, an unfinished vocal over a skeletal guitar, no beat, no arrangement. Just a breathy line recorded hours ago, the rawness of it unintentional and perfect. It wasn't meant to be a song. It was just Jungkook thinking out loud into a mic, half singing, half confessing. The line replayed. "If I lose you again, I won't forgive myself a second time." He removed the headphones, ran a hand through his hair, exhaled slowly. Behind him, the door opened without a knock, soft enough that the hinges didn't even protest. Taehyung's silhouette filled the frame, hoodie pulled up, hair still damp from a quick shower, his bare feet silent against the tile. He didn't speak, just stepped in and quietly closed the door behind him, his presence like gravity, strong enough to pull Jungkook's attention without effort. "I thought you were asleep," Jungkook said, voice low and rough. Taehyung sat down beside him without responding, his thigh pressed lightly against Jungkook as he rested his back against the wall. After a few seconds, he asked, "Were you going to play it for me?" Jungkook hesitated, then nodded. "I was going to, but I wasn't sure if it was finished." Taehyung looked sideways at him. "Maybe it's not supposed to be." There was a beat of silence. "Can I hear it?" he asked. Jungkook reached for the headphones, paused, then handed them to Taehyung. "It's messy." Taehyung took them, placed them over his ears, and pressed play. He closed his eyes, face unreadable. The room was too quiet without the sound, and Jungkook watched him intently, every breath, every twitch of his jaw. When the track ended, Taehyung didn't move. He stayed still for several seconds longer, letting it echo in his head like memory. When he finally pulled the headphones off, he said only one thing. "Let's record it together." Jungkook blinked, "Now." Taehyung nodded, "Right now." Something in Jungkook's chest clicked into place. He stood up without hesitation, powered on the condenser mic, opened a new session. No click track, no layers, just Taehyung sitting in front of the mic, Jungkook behind him adjusting levels. Then they switched, took turns laying down lines, breathing into the same space, harmonizing instinctively. They didn't need to talk between takes. Each glance, each nod carried meaning. The studio filled with something holy, untouched by polish, untouched by pressure, just them, just truth. When it was done, they listened back in silence. The imperfections remained, a breath too loud, a note slightly strained, Taehyung's voice breaking at one point not because of pitch but because of emotion, and Jungkook left it in. Because it was real. Taehyung turned toward him slowly. "What do we call it?" Jungkook met his gaze. "Nothing." Taehyung frowned slightly. "I mean," Jungkook explained, "let's not name it, let's not post it, let's just let it live here." Taehyung nodded once slowly, as if understanding more than just the words, just ours. "Yeah." He moved closer then, slow, deliberate, until they were face to face in the low light, the distance between them a whisper. Jungkook's breath caught when Taehyung's hand found his. There was no tremble, no second guessing. When they kissed, it wasn't cinematic. It wasn't loud. It was quiet. And that's what made it feel infinite. It didn't ask for permission. It didn't shout. It simply was. The culmination of every ache, every silent apology, every unsent message finally received. Taehyung's fingers curled in the fabric of Jungkook's shirt. Jungkook's hand cradled the side of Taehyung's neck, and when they pulled apart, their foreheads rested together, breath mingling in the fragile stillness. "Does this ruin everything?" Jungkook whispered, not out of fear, but out of history. Taehyung didn't answer right away. He let the question hang, let the weight of it settle. Then softly he said, "No, it saves it." That night they didn't sleep, not in the traditional sense. They curled on the studio couch under a thin throw blanket, limbs tangled, the quiet hum of the monitors around them, unreleased music looping in the background like a lullaby only they knew. It wasn't lust. It wasn't spectacle. It was intimacy, clean and raw and real. And when the sun breached the skyline, seeping orange into the corners of the windows, neither of them moved. They were exactly where they needed to be. The next few days blurred in warmth. The world continued, rehearsals resumed, interviews scheduled, outfits fitted, but something between them had shifted, not in a way anyone could immediately identify, not with grand gestures, but with presence. The way Taehyung's eyes softened when Jungkook entered a room. The way Jungkook reached for Taehyung's coffee without needing to ask. The way their voices found each other more easily in harmonies, as though they'd remembered how to listen. Yoongi noticed it first. He didn't comment, just raised a knowing brow over his mixing console and shook his head with a smile. Jimin, on the other hand, walked in on them asleep in the vocal booth one afternoon. Taehyung curled against Jungkook's side, both of them wrapped in the same jacket, soft breathing in sync. He stood there for a moment, hand frozen on the doorknob, eyes wide. Then he quietly closed the door again. Lips pressed into the kind of smile that held 100 unspoken blessings. Later at dinner, he nudged Jungkook under the table and whispered, "About time." Jungkook blinked at him. "What?" Jimin just smirked, "Nothing." The fandom remained blissfully unaware, at least outwardly, but they felt it, the energy, the shift. The way the two of them began to exist within the same frame differently, not performative, not loud, just connected. At one fansign event, when asked which member inspired his current songwriting the most, Jungkook paused for a second too long before glancing sideways at Taehyung. Taehyung didn't look up, but the corner of his mouth twitched ever so slightly. The fan gasped softly. And so the whispers began. But for once, neither of them were afraid. They didn't try to control the narrative. They didn't deny or confirm. They simply lived unapologetically, letting the music tell the parts of the story that didn't need words, letting the silences speak where microphones couldn't reach. Because what they had now wasn't fragile. It had been tested, shattered, rebuilt. It was honest, and it was still. Even in the chaos of cameras and comebacks, even in the weight of fame and expectation, even in the days when doubt crept in like smoke, what they'd rebuilt together held strong. Not perfect, but present. And in the quietest corners of their world, on late-night rooftops, inside half-lit studios, in the pauses between laughter and longing, Jungkook and Taehyung had found the one thing they never expected to rediscover in the noise of everything. Peace. With each other. And within themselves. Still, the rain came unexpectedly that afternoon, soft and silver, slipping down the glass walls of the company building in lazy streaks. Practice had just ended. The others had already drifted out one by one, leaving behind only the echo of tired footsteps and the smell of sweat and fabric softener. Jungkook stayed behind, not out of obligation, but because he felt something restless in his chest that only solitude could calm. Or at least, that's what he told himself. He lay sprawled on the floor, arms flung out like wings, chest rising and falling with each deep breath. The studio lights had been dimmed, the only illumination coming from the muted light filtering through the rain-streaked windows. It made the entire room feel underwater, quiet, blue, slow. He closed his eyes. But not for long. Taehyung entered without knocking. The door creaked gently and clicked shut behind him. His steps were unhurried. His presence wasn't loud. He didn't ask for permission. He never had to. Jungkook didn't move as Taehyung walked toward him, and Taehyung didn't speak until he'd lowered himself to the floor beside him, head resting near Jungkook's shoulder, close enough that their breaths felt like they belonged to the same rhythm. "I saw you slip away," Taehyung said after a moment. "Thought maybe you were running again." Jungkook opened his eyes, exhaled slowly through his nose. "I'm not." "I know." Rain tapped against the windows, delicate and persistent. Taehyung rolled onto his side, propping his head up on one hand as he looked at Jungkook. "What does it feel like now?" Jungkook blinked at the ceiling. "What?" "This, us, everything after the storm, after the silence. What does it feel like?" Jungkook turned his head, eyes meeting his. "Like I finally stopped holding my breath." Taehyung smiled, quiet and tired and full of something warm. "Me too." He reached out, fingers ghosting over Jungkook's hand before curling in between his. Not seeking, just anchoring. Jungkook let him. They stayed like that for a while, listening to the rain. There was no script to follow, no cameras to cater to, no choreography demanding precision, just breath, and the space between them now sacred instead of fragile. It was strange, Jungkook thought, how much had changed, and yet, how familiar everything felt, as if the versions of themselves that had collided so painfully just months ago had finally softened their edges enough to fit back together without splintering. The group was shifting too. In rehearsals, Namjoon had started trusting them with harmonies again, duets they hadn't been assigned in over a year. During a recent fan call, Seokjin had subtly redirected a comment about gaps in the group dynamic toward a light-hearted anecdote, shielding without invalidating. Hoseok had begun teasing them again, loud and silly, but with that glimmer of protectiveness underneath. And Jimin watched them constantly. With eyes like a brother who knew where all the bruises were, even the ones no one else saw. But not everything was smooth. Not all scars had faded. They'd been booked for a variety show together, just the two of them, as a special segment meant to highlight unbreakable bonds. It sounded poetic on the schedule, a clean narrative, redemption arc, fanservice. The production crew was giddy about it. Taehyung had agreed before checking with Jungkook. Jungkook had smiled and said, "Yeah, it's fine." But he hadn't meant it. He realized it when they arrived on set and saw the props. The producers had recreated a moment from their past, a dorm kitchen set from their early trainee days, down to the mismatched mugs and the sticky note on the fridge with "Don't eat my ramen V." There were even printed photos of them from 6 years ago, tacked onto the fake fridge, their younger selves beaming with ignorance of the heartbreaks to come. It was too much. Jungkook froze. Taehyung noticed. He stepped closer, voice lowered beneath the hum of the crew. "You okay?" Jungkook's hands curled into fists. "They want the old us." "We are the old us." "No," Jungkook said sharply, eyes flicking to his. "We're not, we can't be." The producer called for rehearsal. Taehyung didn't move. "We don't have to do this." "Yes, we do," Jungkook said, forcing his voice steady. "Because if we don't, they'll think we broke again." Taehyung frowned. "Who cares what they think?" "I do," Jungkook admitted. "Not for me, for you. I don't want them blaming you again." Taehyung's expression cracked. "I couldn't protect you last time," Jungkook whispered. "Not from the comments, not from the cold looks, not from me." Taehyung reached out, took his wrist. "Then don't protect me, stand with me." Jungkook looked at him, throat tight. Taehyung's eyes didn't waver. "We show them this version, not the old one, not the perfect one, this one, scars and all." And so they did. During the shoot, they didn't laugh the way they used to. Not forced, not exaggerated, but the smiles they shared were real, small, earned. They told stories they hadn't told before, like the time Taehyung almost quit and Jungkook had sat outside his door for 3 hours without saying a word. Like the time Jungkook lost his voice before a live and Taehyung had stepped in to sing his lines without being asked. They didn't perform nostalgia. They offered honesty. And the fans noticed. The clip went viral, not because it was flawless but because it was raw. They weren't pretending to be whole. They were showing what it looked like to choose healing again and again. That night, Jungkook sat on the rooftop again, hoodie pulled tight, a cigarette unlit between his fingers. He didn't smoke anymore, but sometimes he just needed to hold something. Taehyung joined him minutes later, as if summoned. "I used to come up here when I hated everything," Jungkook said quietly. "The pressure, the noise, you." Taehyung didn't flinch, and now? Jungkook turned to him. "Now I come here to remember why I stayed." Taehyung sat beside him, pulling his knees up to his chest. "Do you still hate me sometimes?" Jungkook took a breath. "No, but I still get scared, that this thing between us, that it'll crack again." "It might," Taehyung said, voice even. "But I'd rather break with you than be whole without you." The words weren't dramatic. They weren't poetic, but they landed like an anchor in Jungkook's chest. He reached over, took Taehyung's hand. Cold fingers, warm grip. They didn't need to kiss, didn't need to say more. The world around them spun on, headlines blurring, speculation rising, schedules looming. But up there, on the edge of everything, they simply existed, together. And that was enough. Still,